My name is Margaret Okafor. I'm 43 years old. 14 months ago, I buried my husband. His name was David. He was 47, a civil engineer who coached youth soccer on weekends and made coffee every morning before I woke up so it would be ready when I came downstairs. He died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday in February, in the parking lot of the office building where he'd worked for 16 years. He was there one morning and gone before noon, and there is no way to explain what that does to a person that language fully reaches. I was a widow at 42 with a 14-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a grief so total it had its own weather. And in the middle of that, my parents, my own mother and father, filed paperwork attempting to redirect David's $2.1 million life insurance policy to themselves. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, on a Thursday afternoon in January, David and I had sat in the office of a notary named Patricia Chu and updated every document we owned. New beneficiary forms, notarized and filed directly with the insurer. Updated will, healthcare directives. Patricia Chu had already sent my copy. Before I tell you what happened when the insurance company called my attorney, please like and subscribe, but only if this story is speaking to you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. This community means more to me than I can say. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the older of 2 daughters. My family looked fine from the outside. We went to church. We had a house with a yard. We took vacations to Myrtle Beach. My parents, Charles and Evelyn Marsh, my father worked in municipal contracting for 30 years. He was good at charm and better at leverage. He understood money as power, not wealth exactly, but control. Who had it, who needed it, who could be made to need it. My mother was his instrument in most things and his conscience in none. She was warm to people who could benefit them and cold to anyone who'd ceased to be useful. She'd been cold to David for 11 years. My younger sister Pamela, 2 years younger, our parents' emotional favorite in the particular way that meant she was never held to anything. Sweet, avoidant, present at gatherings and absent from anything requiring effort. Me, the capable one, the one who handled things, who showed up and solved problems and was rewarded for it with more problems to solve. David and I met when I was 29, married at 31. From the beginning, my parents found reasons to be lukewarm about him. He was Nigerian-American, the son of an Enugu family that had immigrated in the 1980s. My parents never said anything direct, but the coolness was consistent and specific, and David felt it every time. He never complained. He showed up for every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner with the same steady warmth, and I watched my parents accept it without ever fully returning it. The imbalance had a long history. When I was 26, I lent my father $8,000 to cover a gap in a contracting payment that had delayed. He paid it back in 3 installments over 2 years, which was fine, but he never acknowledged it as a favor. When I mentioned it once, gently, he said, "That's what family does, Margaret. You don't keep score." When I was 34, my mother was diagnosed with a treatable but serious thyroid condition. I flew to Columbus 4 times in 6 months, coordinating her care, driving her to appointments, managing her prescriptions while working full-time, and raising a 4-year-old. Pamela sent flowers twice. My parents said I was wonderful. They did not, as far as I ever saw, say the same to Pamela about her absence. When I was 38, David and I bought our home, a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville that we'd saved for over 7 years. Down payment of $112,000, every dollar earned and set aside by us. My parents came to see the house, and my mother's first comment was that the kitchen felt dark. David grilled burgers in the backyard that afternoon, and my father ate 2 of them and never complimented the house again. I told myself it was generational, that they showed love differently, that some parents didn't have the vocabulary for pride. I was still telling myself that when David died. The weeks after David's death exist in my memory as a kind of blur with sharp edges. Our daughter Imani held herself together with a dignity that broke my heart daily. Our friends were extraordinary. David's colleagues organized meal deliveries for 3 weeks. His parents, Emmanuel and Grace, flew in from Houston and stayed for 10 days, and grieved with us in a way that was full and open and made space for everyone's pain. My parents arrived 2 days after David died. They stayed for a week. In that week, my father asked me twice about the life insurance. Not with cruelty, framed as concern, as helping me get organized. What was the policy value? Had I contacted the insurer? Did I have an attorney handling things? I told him David and I had updated all our documents in January and that I had everything handled. He nodded. He asked no follow-up questions, which I registered as relief. It was not relief. What I didn't know, what I would not know for 6 more weeks, was that my father had, at some point in those first raw days, located a copy of an earlier beneficiary form. A form David had filed when he first took out the policy 11 years earlier, before we were married, before Imani was born, back when he'd named his mother Grace as primary beneficiary. A form that had been superseded entirely by the January update, but that still existed, somewhere, in whatever papers my father had access to during his week in our home. I still don't know exactly how he found it. I have my understanding of what must have happened, and I've made my peace with not having every answer. What I know is what the insurance company's fraud investigator told me later, that a claim had been filed on the policy using beneficiary documentation that appeared to name Charles and Evelyn Marsh as primary beneficiaries, on a form that bore what purported to be David's signature, notarized, dated 3 months before his death. It was fraudulent in ways I still have difficulty saying out loud about my own parents. 6 weeks after David's funeral, I received a call from my attorney, a woman named Sandra Obi, who had handled our estate planning and been a steady, careful presence through the worst weeks of my life. She had received a communication from the insurer's legal team. "Margaret," she said, "I need you to come in today, this afternoon if you can." I went in that afternoon. Sandra laid it out plainly. A claim had been filed on the $2.1 million policy. The beneficiary documentation submitted was inconsistent with the forms on file. The insurer had flagged it because 3 weeks before David's death, Patricia Chu, our notary, had filed the updated beneficiary forms directly with the carrier, as we had specifically arranged. Those forms named me as primary beneficiary and Imani as contingent. When the competing claim arrived, the insurer's team had compared the 2 sets of documents. The signatures didn't align. The notarization on the fraudulent form listed a notary whose license, when checked, had been expired for 14 months. The insurer had already contacted their fraud division. Sandra looked at me across her desk. "Margaret, I have to ask you directly. Do you have any idea who filed this?" I sat with that question for a long time. Then I told her what I knew, and what I suspected. "I need to tell you about Patricia Chu, because she matters to this story more than just as a name on a form." Patricia was a notary who worked out of a small office services suite near our neighborhood, a woman in her 60s who had been doing this work for over 2 decades, and treated every document she handled as if it were sacred. When David and I came in that January Thursday, he'd been having chest discomfort for a few weeks, nothing the cardiologist had flagged as critical yet, but David was the kind of man who took action on things. He didn't want to be someone who'd meant to update his documents. Patricia walked us through every form. She filed the beneficiary update directly with the insurer's document portal from her office computer, right in front of us, and printed confirmation receipts. Then she mailed notarized copies to our home address and sent a second set to Sandra's office. "Belt and suspenders," David said, and Patricia laughed. He was gone 23 days later. I've thought about that afternoon in Patricia's office many times since. How David had been quietly thorough in the way he was about everything. How he hadn't made it heavy or frightening, just practical, organized, the way he approached every problem. How we'd gone for Thai food afterward and talked about Imani's upcoming school play. He protected us even then, even before we knew there was anything to protect against. When Sandra contacted Patricia following the fraud investigation, Patricia's records were complete, time-stamped, and filed with the insurer's confirmation number. She provided everything to the fraud division within 48 hours. I sent her flowers. It felt insufficient. It was all I had. The investigation took 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, I told no one in my family what was happening. I went through the holidays, a quiet Thanksgiving with David's parents and Imani, a Christmas that was its own particular grief. I exchanged the usual texts with my parents and Pamela. My mother called every Sunday. I answered and kept my voice even. I have never in my life worked harder to keep my voice even. Sandra and I met with the insurer's fraud investigators twice. I provided everything I had: the January appointment confirmation, Patricia's filing receipts, the correspondence establishing Sandra as our estate attorney. The investigators were professional and thorough, and asked hard questions that I answered completely. My father called me in November, about 8 weeks in, to ask how the insurance claim was progressing. "It's being processed," I said. "These things take time," he said. "If you need any help navigating it, I'm happy to make calls." "I have an attorney," I said. "I'm fine." He paused. "You sound tired, Margaret." "I'm a widow, Dad." He said, of course, and we moved on. I sat on my kitchen floor after that call and cried for 20 minutes. Not for what I'd lost. I cried for that every day and had made a kind of order with it. I cried because I was looking at my father's number on my phone and trying to reconcile the man who had called to check on me with the man who had, 6 weeks after I buried my husband, attempted to take $2.1 million from his widow and his grandchild. Imani came downstairs while I was still on the floor. She sat down next to me without saying anything and put her head on my shoulder. She was 14 and she understood something, in the way children understand things they can't yet articulate, that her mother was carrying more than grief. "We're okay," I told her. "I know," she said. "We're Okafor women." She said it exactly the way David would have said it. I don't know where she learned that. Maybe from him, maybe from watching me, maybe from someplace in her that was simply hers. We sat on the kitchen floor together for a while, and then we got up and made dinner. The fraud investigation concluded in January, 1 year, almost to the day, after David and I had sat in Patricia Chu's office. The finding was unambiguous. The claim filed against the policy was fraudulent. The signature was forged. The notarization was false. The insurer declined the competing claim in full and released the policy proceeds to me as the verified primary beneficiary. Sandra called me with the outcome on a Wednesday morning. I was in my own driveway, having just dropped Imani at school. I sat in the car for a long time after the call, watching the neighbor's dog walk past with his owner. $2.1 million, David's 16 years of premium payments, his careful, quiet protection. It was mine. Ours. His last gift to Imani and me, intact. The following week, with Sandra present, I called my parents together on a video call. My father answered with his usual composure. My mother smiled the way she smiled at the beginning of calls, before she knew what the call was for. I told them I knew what they had done. I told them the investigation had concluded. I told them exactly what the findings were. I told them that the insurer had referred the matter to the state attorney general's office, which was standard procedure in fraud investigations of this value, and that there was nothing I had done to accelerate or prevent that process. It had followed its own course. My father said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Margaret, we were trying to protect you. You weren't in a state to manage that amount of money. We thought—" "Stop," I said. I said it quietly, not with anger, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has heard every version of this justification and is no longer willing to make room for it. "You forged my husband's signature, 6 weeks after I buried him, with Imani in the next room, and you are sitting there telling me you were protecting me." My mother started crying. My father started to say something else. I ended the call. The legal process that followed was handled entirely by attorneys and investigators. Mine, the insurers, and eventually the state's. I made the decision early not to be in the room for any of it beyond what was required of me, and to keep my focus on Imani and on building the life David had worked to make possible. My parents did not face criminal charges. The Attorney General's office investigated. The insurer declined to pursue criminal prosecution in exchange for a full formal admission and cooperation, a decision I was not part of but that Sandra explained carefully and that I ultimately accepted. It was not the outcome I would have chosen, but the policy was protected and the fraud was documented on record, and at some point I had to decide what I was spending my energy on. I chose Imani. My relationship with my parents is over. Not in anger. I moved past anger a long time ago, somewhere in those 11 weeks of keeping my voice even. But a parent who looks at their widowed daughter holding her grieving child and sees an opportunity to take $2.1 million is not a parent I can find a path back to. Some doors close because they have to. Pamela reached out 6 months later. Carefully, apologetically. She had not known. I believed that fully. Pamela had never been someone who participated in my parents' calculations. She asked if we could talk. We have talked twice. Carefully, slowly. I don't know yet what that relationship becomes. But she is Imani's aunt and she loved David, and I'm not closing that door. 14 months out, my life looks like this. Imani is 15, in the 10th grade, co-captain of her school's debate team, and applying to summer programs in environmental science. She talks about her father every day in the natural, integrated way of someone who has decided grief is not a separate room you visit, but something you carry with you as part of the texture of living. She got that from somewhere. I like to think she got it from him. David's policy proceeds are in a structured account managed by a financial advisor Sandra recommended, a woman named Lydia, who spent our first meeting asking questions and taking notes, and at the end said, "Here's how I think we protect this for 20 years. I appreciated that word. Protect. It was the right word. Imani's college education is fully funded. There is a home that is ours without threat. There is time and stability, and the particular freedom that comes from knowing that the thing David built cannot be touched. I think about him every morning. The coffee was always ready when I came downstairs because he set the timer before he went to bed. For months after he died, I kept setting it myself, not because I forgot, but because the ritual felt like continuity, like a small daily act of keeping something alive. I still set it. I probably always will. If you're watching this and you're in the middle of grief, raw, recent, total, I want to say first that I'm sorry. Not in the way people say it because they don't know what else to offer. I mean it the way someone means it who has sat on a kitchen floor and felt the specific weight of a world that has changed in ways it will not change back from. And if you're in grief and also navigating something that is asking you to protect yourself at the same time, if the worst thing that happened is being compounded by the people who should be standing next to you, I want you to hear this clearly. Document everything. Update everything. Trust the people who have earned it, and give the people who haven't as little access as the situation allows. You don't have to make a decision about them today, but protect yourself today. David updated those forms because he was the kind of man who took care of things. He had no way of knowing what was coming. Neither did I. But his thoroughness, a Thursday afternoon, a notary he'd Googled, a printer humming out confirmation receipts, that afternoon is the reason Imani is going to college and our house is still our home. Take care of your documents the way David took care of his. Not out of fear, out of love. If this story reached you today, leave a comment. Tell me something about the person you're protecting, or the person who protected you. I read everything in this space. Subscribe if you want to stay here. I'll keep telling these stories as honestly as I know how. Take care of yourselves. And take care of your paperwork.